Well, here we are with another episode. We're continuing with Parasyte. Now, unlike some of my previous run-throughs, you'll find that I actually use quite a bit of snapshots from the anime, whereas I've traditionally used a lot more of those from the manga. That isn't to say that I didn't use the manga, but I think it's relevant to talk about the anime, as it can be an entry point for new readers, and honestly, I'm no manga elitist, so whatever works for others works for me. Anyway, when we last dropped Parasyte, I felt that we talked a lot around Migi and his kind, but never really talked about it, so I want to dedicate some time to him and his kind. So, like the title of the series suggests, Migi and his kind are parasites. They find living bodies and latch onto them. For most, they are actually able to take over the body by moving up and lodging themselves into the body's brain, thus falling into control of the entire body as a whole. Once the parasite is settled, the body actually changes, being able to morph according to the parasite's wishes. Although it hasn't been explicitly mentioned, it seems that how powerful or intelligent the new being is depends a lot on its base host. We saw in the first episode that parasite dog, who was easily beaten by a human parasite, as well as not showing any high level intelligence, probably due to being limited to, well, a dog. The thing about the original body is that the personality does get overwritten and replaced, and while most are usually bloodthirsty and violent, there are exceptions. In the last video, we actually encountered two stereotypical parasites as well as two deviants. Mr. A is a stereotypical parasite, being able to act human for the most part, but with some very obvious violent tendencies. Migi and Reiko are examples of deviants, as they seem to prioritize the accumulation of wealth and rarely seem to desire violence for the sake of food. Migi seems to be thirsty for knowledge in a general sense, while Reiko seems to seek to gain more insight on humans specifically. Although by their base nature, parasites do not have sexes or genders, we will eventually see that those who inhabit female bodies will act at times a little differently from those who inhabit male bodies, but that won't come into play for at least a little while. When a parasite takes control of a body, it actually enhances it, giving it increased strength, speed, and endurance. In most cases, what parts of the body a parasite can power up depends on how much of the body they can control. So while Migi can only really boost up by a significant margin Shinji's arm, Reiko could power up her entire body. I will note that it would be useful to think of these parasites' boosts as sort of like a battery, as there does seem to be a limit on how much a single parasite can increase the physical abilities of a single body. As such, some parasites actually seek out other parasites to merge into a single body in an attempt to become more powerful, as suggested by one of the random attackers from the first volume. Back to Migi, however, he's the biggest deviant in the series so far, as for the most part he's given up wanting to take control of the body as a whole, as he doesn't really hunger for food of any kind, and because he's not particularly violent, instead opting to spend his time absorbing as much information as possible through books and the internet. With these positives come the negatives. Unlike most parasites, the power up that Migi gives to Shinji is rather limited, at least in comparison. While his right arm is definitely on par with the max strength of other parasites, the rest of the body is stronger than most humans but miles away from being able to stand up to other parasites. Migi also needs to nap for a few hours a day, and during that time, Shinji is just an average human. There's a few more neat things that parasites can do, but considering where we're at in the story, we'll leave that for a little later. Back to the story, today we'll be tackling the second unofficial arc called Hole in the Chest, roughly going from chapter 9 to 15. First things first, Shinji and Migi continue on with their day-to-day, and the two experiment with what they can and cannot do. Migi finds that for a short period he can actually detach from Shinji's body, leaving him armless, to roam around for a bit. If he doesn't get back to him, however, it is implied that Migi would probably just simply die off. We also learn about some other things. Migi won't take control of Shinji's body, not necessarily because he doesn't want to, but rather that he probably can't anyway, as he reached maturity, never having come into contact with the brain, and as such, wouldn't even really know how to pilot it if he were to reach the brain. We also see difficulties from other parasites with limitations on what kind of bodies they can control, as what conditions parasites reach maturity under actually heavily affects their ability as a whole, such as, for example, one who matured in a male's body might have difficulty controlling a female body and vice versa. The only thing that really makes the days deviate is that Shinji's parents announced that they want to go on a trip, as they haven't really left the house since Shinji was a kid, and that as he was now in high school, they were now more comfortable with leaving him alone for a few days at least. Now, while we've really talked about how parasites can overwrite one's personality if they take control of the brain, we never really considered if a parasite like Migi could influence Shinji's personality. And to be honest, it's really hard to tell. While it's true that from the beginning of the story till now, he's changed quite a bit, the fact that he's a teenager means that it could just be him changing naturally through hormone fluctuations or something. It's a really cool decision from the writer's part, in my opinion, as while some may be quick to decide that Migi definitely influenced Shinji in one way or another, it does at least leave the door open to Shinji just developing as a person himself. As his parents left for their vacation, this is really just a premise for Shinji to do things more freely, and lets the plot take us to strange places, without having the need to balance what the parents think. The very first of these events is when he walks to school and finds one of his classmates, or bully depending on how you view it, getting beaten up by another school's group of students. And while he doesn't necessarily have any good feelings towards the guy getting beaten up, you still don't really want to see a kid from your school getting a makeover from kids from another school, so he jumps in. Contrary to what you would expect, he doesn't actually go full beast mode and take down all of them out, as Migi is currently dormant. The only girl from the bully group, Kana, who seems to be the leader, gets frightened by Shinji's eyes as she senses a danger from him due to her having almost a sixth sense like thing, and calls the guys off Shinji and the other. Having seen his girl pay attention to Shinji pisses the main bully of the group, Mitsuo, off, so he hunts Shinji down after school to beat him up. By this time, Migi is up and awake and is trying his best to try and eliminate Mitsuo, and Shinji spends most of the fight actually just trying to keep Migi from murdering these assholes. As Mitsuo drags Shinji right after he got out of school, they didn't actually make it too far from the school grounds, and what this means is that the rest of Shinji's schoolboys actually come to back Shinji up. While it seems that Mitsuo got the short end of this, what actually happens is that he was probably saved by this event. Kana also appears and is visibly pissed that Mitsuo screwed with Shinji, even after being told not to, but seems to be falling even harder for Shinji. All things considered, everyone involved avoided the worst case scenario. Shinji didn't get completely beaten up, Mitsuo didn't get eviscerated, and Satomi, who was there, got a little shaken, but overall okay. The whole situation leads to a little heart-to-heart between our blossoming couple, so that's cool. While that's happening, we actually cut to Shinji's parents on their trip, and the thing is, when the writer decides to cut like this, it's pretty obvious that something is going to happen. Shinji's parents go through the flow of their second honeymoon, but gets attacked by this injured parasite on the search for a female body to take over. Kazuyuki, the father, barely escapes with his life, but the fate of Nobuko, the mother, is as of yet unknown. Before falling unconscious, Kazuyuki manages to call Shinji, but before being able to properly explain the situation, things fade to black for him. Hours after the call, Migi informs Shinji that a parasite was nearby, but by the time Shinji can get into action, the parasite actually enters his home. And the reveal of the volume is that Shinji's mother was taken over by a parasite and is now looking to finish the job of hunting down the father. Migi tries his best to take down the new enemy, but as Shinji was holding him back due to it still being physically his mother, Shinji gets a knife straight to the heart and lies on the floor bleeding to death. As the parasite inhabiting Nobuko didn't have any truly ill will towards Migi, it opts to leave Shinji without killing him, slowly letting him die and just bleed to death, to both prioritize the search for Kazuki and to give Migi a little more time to find a new host body. Contrary to what this parasite believed, Migi is a real bro, or sis, or whatever, bris, yeah that's a good word, bris. Instead of leaving Shinji to die, Migi chooses to integrate himself further with Shinji, essentially replacing his now destroyed heart and absorbing nutrients and water for the unconscious Shinji. Migi does this for 3 days straight and falls into a deep sleep, but as Migi goes to sleep, Shinji finally awakens. Almost as though on cue, he receives a call from the hospital where Kazuyuki was sent and decides to head there, skipping school because he's cool now. Like father, like son, Kazuyuki also awakens from his injuries and is met with local detectives who inform him that although Kazuyuki says that Nobuki was killed, she was still seen walking around, which we know why. Shinji finally arrives to the hospital and sits down to talk with his father. Now this conversation was pretty well done in my opinion. Both of them know the truth of the mother having been killed by a monster and now being taken over, and in some sense this should have been a heart-to-heart. But for those who've ever talked with their fathers, even though he should essentially be one of the closest people to talk to, somehow the conversation can get strangely awkward where neither really want to open up. Perhaps it's something about us men and toxic masculinity, I don't know, but the fact of the matter is that this conversation is so awkward on so many levels that in my opinion, it makes it great. As his father was stuck in the hospital bed for at least a few more days, Shinji decides to stay on the island. At least I'm pretty sure this is an island, and try to hunt the imposter mother. Migi finally awakens and here we have a true heart-to-heart. Migi doesn't outright say it, but it's one of those situations where the words don't really fit the actions. Migi says that keeping Shinji alive was just to keep himself alive, but it's now become pretty obvious that if Migi really wanted to, he could have easily bounced out and found a new host And when Shinji realizes that, he understands that for all intents and purposes, although they are in a strange relationship, Shinji can regard Migi as his savior and, more importantly, his friend. After this heart-to-heart, we do get down to the brass tacks. Because Migi had to integrate himself with Shinji through his heart, things have changed up for the two. On the side of Migi, he can no longer be fully active for as long, and for 4 hours a day especially, he will be completely dormant, and Shinji will be left to fend for himself. On the other hand, because Migi is now part of Shinji's body, that central blood pumping unit, a lot of Migi's particles are actually sort of being spread around Shinji's entire body, and as such we'll find that his physical abilities have generally been lifted to superhuman levels, not quite to the level of Parasyte's, but just a notch or two under. Either way, I think this exchange was also well done. At least now both of them know where each other stand, and Shinji will stop trying to cut off his own arm. As that was wrapping up, Migi does inform Shinji that he's sensing another Parasyte and hoping to chase down his not mother. Shinji sprints into action and comes face to face with it. The only problem, of course, is that this it is not his mother, but this guy who's more like Shinji, another host's body who has a Parasyte jaw with an intact brain. And I'll look to take a pause here for this second episode on Parasyte. The wiki says that chapter 16 should also fall under the hole in the chest arc, but I think this is a better place to end. And hey, if you really want to follow the wiki, go ahead and follow the wiki, I guess. Thank you all for tuning in to this second episode of Parasyte. I hope you enjoyed the podcast rips that I put up recently, and if not, go ahead and give them a listen. The Great Pretender one is a little old in the context that we only tackled the first season, but the Devilman 1972 one will be good for any time, as that's an old classic. At the time of me releasing this video, I did see the news of the passing of the Berserk author Kentaro Miura, as well as Kana Hoshino, both in their 50s. This is incredibly sad news, and I'm not 100% sure how to put into words how I feel right now. Either way, sucks to end on a depressing note. I hope you'll come back for next time for the third part of the series. That's all from me, Yuan from Manga4Dummies, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye guys.